Hi and welcome to part 4 of the ultimate needle felted mouse tutorial. Today we are going to be adding the bulk that we made yesterday to the armature of our mouse so we can really start to see the mouse taking form. So get your needles at the ready, you are going to really start seeing your mouse coming to life in this part of the tutorial. So please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, The Dopamine Artist. Enjoy this part of the tutorial and I will see you tomorrow with part 5. Take care. So now that we've made our armature, what we're going to do now is add the bulk pieces that we made a moment ago to our armature. And I'm just stretching him out on my cushion because he's about to encounter a pretty invasive operation. So once he's been stretched out, I'm going to take piece number 1 that we made a moment ago. I'm going to hold that over the main torso area, so the longest length within the armature. We're going to hold that piece in place. And I'm going to be using my medium double twisted needle pen to secure this in place because it needs to be really firmly added. And I'm going to use my index finger and forefinger just to hold it in place, and I'm carefully going to felt in between my index finger and forefinger down the middle of the piece that we're adding and into the armature. And you need to be very careful here because you've got a lot of wire and a lot of bulk that could break your needles. So we want to make sure that we really go careful and do this very tentatively, but all the time ensuring that we're securing that piece of wool to the armature. And this is probably the most difficult piece to add because for that very reason, because the armature is so close to where we're felting. But as we add more pieces, I promise you this will get easier. So what I'm doing is I'm just folding the sides over and I'm just holding that firmly in place. And then we're just going to fold from the inside to the outside. So about 1 centimetre into the wool and then out to the edge, and we're just tacking that in to the back of our armature. And we're going to do this very gradually, working our way up the mouse's body. And we don't want to have too much around the leg area, which is why it's important to keep it all kind of concentrated around the length of the middle section of the mouse. So as you can see there, I'm just holding it again with my index and forefinger. I'm stretching that wool quite firmly down the side of the armature, and then I'm using my needles side by side just to tack that in. And that's the key, it's just making sure it's securely tacked in. And never underestimate how crucial this stage is, because this is going to make or break your mouse adding the bulk to him, because it's going to show you kind of all the areas that are going to give you some definition. And when I first started out needle felting, I didn't realise quite how important adding the bulk was, and I had a lot of very sort of strange alien looking mice that I was making. And then as I've learnt and practiced over the last 4.5 years, I've discovered that it's really important, if you're trying to create a certain body shape or face shape, that the undergarments, if you like, are probably the most important thing. So I'm just tacking around the legs, and don't push too hard with your needle when you're tacking these things in, okay? And I'm just going to take piece number 2, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to hold it over the chest area as well, this lump here. So I'm just going to place it over the centre of the mouse again, because it's slightly longer. It comes just above the legs, and we're gonna felt this over the chest area. And again, this is really important because when you come to wrap your mouse later on, if you don't have any bulk over the chest area, it's going to look a bit odd, which is why it's important to get this stage in. So I'm just holding it in place I'm just tacking down through the middle. And as you can see here, again, there's a lot of wire. So I'm just going to tack it around the arm area. And just carefully tack around the neck and the arms, tucking the wool behind the shoulders, using your medium needles side by side. And all we're doing is we're just making sure that this piece of wool doesn't go anywhere at this moment in time, and we can tidy all this up after. And then what I'm doing now is I'm going to go under the arm, so we've got a nice neat tuck on either side of the arm, and this is going to start creating our chest and our waist area. And we're going to go from the inside of the wool again, and we're going to move our needles to the outside, so about sort of 3 centimeters inwards you're going to start, and then you're going to use your needles and felt to the very edges of where that wool is, and you're kind of tacking it into the piece number 1 that you've already added. So always take your time with needle felting. Don't feel the need to rush, because the minute we start rushing is the minute that it all goes a bit wrong. So just do it gradually, and that way if there's something that doesn't look quite right, you can correct it quite quickly. Whereas if you just kind of go in all guns blazing and then realise half an hour later that you've done something wrong, it's a lot more tricky to correct. So just do it gradually and keep checking for your symmetry. So I'm just tacking in the rest of the length of the second piece. I don't know if you can hear that outside, but the weather here today is really, really disgusting. It's absolutely chucking it down. Good old British summertime. So hopefully the rain isn't too distracting. So I'm just going to tack now, using the needles one over the top, underneath the arm, going back over the shoulder area as well, just getting that nice and tight. And this is going to start forming your mouse's shoulder. So I'm just checking to make sure that those edges are actually nice and secure, giving them an extra felt. And as you can see there, I've just hit some wires. I'm just going to pull it out in the direction that it went in at, so I don't break my needles. And then over on this side. And this is why you've just got to be so cautious. I mean, these are quite thick needles, so they're a bit harder to break than the finer needles, but even so. And then I'm just going to felt in between the legs. And the thing you want to remember when you're making your mouse is you want your legs to be pretty far apart from each other and splayed, because as you begin to felt all the additional panels in, the legs will end up staying in the position that you leave them in. And if they're too close together, he can look a bit strange and out of proportion. So at this stage, if you just pull his legs apart, it will kind of set you up for some more natural looking feet once he's finished. So I'm just adding the third piece now. So the triangular top part is going to go up around the neck and chest area again. And then the flat side, the straight side, is going to go at the bottom of the feet. And this is gradually, as you're kind of adding the bulk, this is going to build the shape of the belly. And again, I'm just tacking around the edges to keep it all secure. And then once it's secure, we can then look to start sort of tacking around the middle and things. It should be a lot easier now because you've got a couple of pieces already incorporated into the armature, so adding this section should be a breeze, should be relatively easy. Okay, just carefully felt into the previous piece around the neck area and get that nice and secured down. And then felt round, bring it round to the other side. It's important to get all those corners tucked in. You don't want anything loose, and you want to try and get the edges of these pieces relatively flat so that you don't get any weird lumps coming through when we add our final wraps to our mouse later on. So I'm just making sure that I'm tacking all this down and it's got a nice sort of straight, smooth side to it. It hasn't got like a sandwichy look to it where I've layered everything on top of each other. So you probably do want to concentrate a fair bit of felting into those edges. And then I'm just going over the front and just ensuring that that's all tacked in as well. So, just going to get that bit a bit neater. And now we're going to add our mouse's bum. And what I'm doing is I'm just placing it so that the frilly edges on either side of the kind of the shorter sides are going slightly over the legs, because we're going to tuck those in. And I'm just stabbing it around the back area first. So we've got a reasonable amount of bulk that we can attach that to now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the frilly edges on the longer sides and I'm going to pull them over the front of the mouse. Quite tightly I'm holding them with my thumb and forefinger. And then the same principle as earlier on, starting from the inside of the piece and then felting towards the sort of the outer limits, the fluffy ends. And then as you can see, we've got lots of fluff around the feet. And we're going to sort that out in a little bit, so don't worry about that. So again, bring that nice and tightly over to the other side. And this also creates additional bulk around the waist for you by bringing this piece all the way around. And then I'm just going to tack that to secure it. And then I'm just going to go under the arms again. What you want to be careful of when you're tacking around under the arms is you don't want to create too much bulk. And that's because when I first started out needle felting, I would add these wrap pieces and I would have all this excess wool and I'd just leave it in place and I'd kind of felt it into the armpit and the shoulder, and I'd end up with these kind of very strange looking arms where they were very short but ridiculously large at the top half and then kind of very thin at the bottom. And I quickly realised that I needed to remove those extra bits of bulk to get a more natural looking arm. So always check that there isn't too much excess wool being felted into the armpit and shoulder area, because you can't undo that, and it's just makes your sculpture look a bit strange. So handy tip there for you. So what I'm doing here is I'm just felting between the legs while he's on his front. And carefully, because the legs are quite solid still, this can be quite tricky to felt into. So it might be worth, I'm still using my medium needle, but it might be worth changing to a finer needle, just to make life a little bit easier for you. And yep, I've decided that fine needle's easier, just because it penetrates that thicker wool a bit more easily. Just go around the legs, and again, take your time with the legs. The legs can be a bit of a pain because the wool's been wrapped so tightly around them. So you want to make sure that you're taking your time so you don't break your needles, but also so you're getting an even felt all round and making sure that you don't get any kind of sort of weird bulky bits of wool that you're felting in, which creates kind of unattractive lumps and things. So you'll probably have a lot of looseness around this stage in relation to the legs, but don't worry about that, because as we continue to felt and add things to your mouse, add features, add additional pieces, it'll all come together nice and tight. So I'm just felting all those loose frilly bits. I'm just felting those, so downwards, and then kind of flipping the mouse and then bringing them around again. Just going around the belly for a little bit. There you go. So I'm just going to, yeah. So you can use your needle to kind of guide things around. So guide any frilly bits of wool very carefully. Just use your needles to pull that round and then felt it into place. And really concentrate on tucking all those additional pieces of wool around the base of the tail as well. It's a good way of, the base of the tail is a good way of sort of hiding any bits of additional bulk, because you're going to have the bottom there anyway, so it doesn't matter if that bit's a bit bulky. And you can see when I'm stabbing my needle into the legs area, you can see how much space I've got there at the moment. So it's still quite lofty, but what we're going to start doing is concentrating some of our efforts into the top half of the mouse body, because we're going to start creating kind of a waist and a chest for him using our needles and felting in that bulk, creating shape. So what I'm doing is I'm just pressing into the mouse, and this is a really good technique which you'll use throughout this tutorial, and that is when you're creating shape. And you need to have some sort of guide. If you press the wool in where you want it to felt, you can kind of see beforehand, you can get a rough idea of what it will look like. So you're kind of just checking it, and then if you're happy with it, you can then start felting it in. And I'm using my fine twisted needles. I should have mentioned this earlier. I'm using the fine twisted needles to do this. And I'm just speeding things up because obviously you know what to do now. So I'm just concentrating around the chest area, giving it a bit of a squeeze, going round the shoulders again. And I'm using the fine needles because I don't want to leave too much of an indentation now. And we're very gradually felting this into place. If we were to use medium or thick needles when we were doing this, what would happen is you would end up pushing too much of the wool in, and you'd end up with a very compacted mouse with not much shape, because you don't have that kind of flexibility to sort of felt it in gradually and get that desired shape that you're looking for. I hope that makes sense. So I'm just working my way around the legs again. And it's all about, like I've said, before, it's all about taking your time. There's absolutely no rush at all. And I'm going in probably about 5 millimeters in with my needle. I'm just getting that chest area nicely tacked in, and just concentrating my efforts into the kind of the upper body of the mouse. And also just remember to kind of keep pulling your mouse's legs apart as well, so they don't sort of go too close together when it's finished. So I'm just using the head wrap now, and I'm placing the head of the mouse about 1.5 inches into it, and then folding that 1.5 inches to 2 inches over, and we're just going to tack that in with a medium needle. Just stab it, so you're stabbing into the wrapped head, but you're also stabbing against the folded over wool as well. And that just anchors that in place. And then what we're going to do from here is I'm just going to hold the head, and I'm going to fold the rest of that wrap around the mouse's head, making sure it's relatively tight, not too tight, but you want it to be relatively firm. And then we're just going to tack that end in to secure it into place. and still using the medium needles. And we want to kind of concentrate on felting around the base of the neck as well, because that's going to help, that's going to help secure it in place. And also it's going to help us to start creating sort of the more narrower part of the mouse's neck when we come to add in additional sections later on. So just give that a good tack into place. And once that's in place, we're going to add our final piece, which is the top of the head. This is probably one of the trickier sides of this part of the tutorial, because it's quite hard to kind of keep this in place and not stab yourself in the finger. So I definitely recommend using gloves for this. I'm not using gloves because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing, and I find that they just kind of get in the way a bit. So I'm taking one for the team, guys. So I'm just very carefully holding it in place with my forefinger and thumb, and then really slowly, initially I was just stabbing it into the centre. And now what I'm doing is I'm just concentrating around the sides and tacking that in against that head wrap that we've just added in. But really take your time with this, do it nice and slowly. You don't need to be quick, because all we're doing is just tacking this into place. So I'm going a bit quicker because I'm reckless. I'm reckless with those needles. So just keep turning the mouse as you're doing it, so you're kind of getting all those loose pieces, loose edges tucked in. And then what you can start doing then is start felting around the top side as well. You can see where the head part is loose. I'm just checking all the time, looking, and then just tacking that down. But try and keep your fingers as far away as possible as you can from the needle, whilst obviously holding it in place. It's a pain because it's one of those things that it doesn't want to stay on of its own accord, so you do need to hold it in place. And now it's kind of tacked in enough that I can kind of let go of it. Save my fingers for another day. And all this does is this enables us to create a nice smooth finish to our mouse head, and it gives us something to then add additional bulk onto later on. And then what I'm doing now is I'm just tacking around the arms again, getting that nice and tight, because like I said before, we don't want loads of unnecessary bulk being formed around the tops of the arms. But that's your first part of your adding bulk to your mouse armature, and we're going to go on to a second fix next.